Just charge it to your card, my brother mocked, expecting me to pay for his lavish party. I left right away. An hour later, my phone exploded with messages. I sat in my car, staring at the flood of notifications lighting up my screen. The city skyline stretched before me, a canvas of twinkling lights against the darkening sky. I could still hear the music pulsing from inside the venue, could still see the over-the-top ice sculpture melting slowly in the center of the room. The extravagant birthday party for my niece Lily, a celebration I had unknowingly funded, continued without me. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped the steering wheel. For years, I had played the role of the generous uncle, the reliable older brother, the family safety net. I had paid for Lily's private school tuition, her ballet lessons, her summer camps. I had covered Jacob's rent when he was between opportunities, which was most of the time. I had settled his credit card debts, co-signed his loans, and bailed him out of every financial disaster he created for himself. And tonight, I had finally reached my breaking point. Growing up, Jacob had always been the golden child. Our parents doted on him from the moment he was born, the charming, charismatic son who could do no wrong. Even when he failed a class, it was because the teacher didn't understand his learning style. When he crashed our father's car at 16, they bought him a new one because he needed to learn responsibility. When he dropped out of college after 3 semesters of partying, they assured everyone he was finding his path. I, on the other hand, was expected to be the responsible one. I studied hard, graduated with honors, built a successful career in software engineering, and saved diligently. By 38, I owned a comfortable condo downtown, had a stable job at a respected tech firm, and had amassed a decent investment portfolio. Not that my parents ever seemed particularly impressed. "Your brother just needs a little more time," they would say whenever I complained about having to cover another of his expenses. "Family helps family. You were always more practical than Jacob." Practical. As if being responsible was somehow a character flaw. I scrolled through the messages flooding my phone. "Where did you go? Dude, the venue's asking for payment. Are you seriously ditching your niece's birthday? Answer your phone. Mom's asking where you went." The final message made me laugh bitterly. "I need the card info ASAP, this is embarrassing." I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat. For the first time in years, I felt something other than resignation. I felt anger, pure and cleansing. The party had started like all our family gatherings, with me arriving on time, gift in hand, while Jacob played the effortless host, dressed in clothes he couldn't afford, serving drinks he hadn't paid for. I had handed Lily her present, a collection of books I'd carefully selected based on interests she'd mentioned during our last visit, and watched her eyes light up. "Thanks, Uncle," she'd exclaimed, hugging me tightly. At 10 years old, she was bright and curious, nothing like her entitled father. That was why I kept paying, I told myself. For Lily, not for Jacob. But then it had happened. Jacob, 3 drinks in and surrounded by his equally shallow friends, had called me over. "Hey, big bro," he'd shouted across the room. "Come meet the guys." Against my better judgment, I had walked over, nodding politely as he introduced me to a group of men I'd never met before. "So what do you do?" one of them had asked, swirling expensive whiskey in his glass. Before I could answer, Jacob had jumped in, slinging an arm around my shoulders. "Oh, my brother's a total nerd. Works with computers all day, no social life, no fun. Total workaholic." He'd grinned widely. "But hey, pays well, right?" The men had laughed, and I'd felt my face flush. It wasn't the first time Jacob had mocked me in front of others, but something about his tone tonight, the casual dismissal, the blatant disrespect, it cut deeper than usual. "At least someone in the family has to be responsible," I'd responded quietly. Jacob had rolled his eyes. Yeah, Mr. Responsible. "Hey, speaking of which," he gestured around at the elaborate party. "The venue needs the card for final payment. Just charge it to your card, like always. I'll get you back next month." The words had hung in the air between us. Just charge it to your card. Like always. As if it were nothing. As if I were nothing but a wallet with legs. In that moment, something inside me had finally broken. Years of resentment, of being taken for granted, of enabling his irresponsibility, it all crystallized into perfect clarity. Without a word, I had turned and walked out, ignoring Jacob's confused calls behind me. Now, sitting in my car, I made decisions I should have made years ago. I called my bank and canceled the additional credit card Jacob had been using, the one I'd foolishly added him to for emergencies. I logged into my online banking app and canceled all automatic payments to Lily's school, Jacob's car loan, and the monthly deposit I'd been making into his account to help with expenses. With each cancellation, I felt lighter, as if I were cutting away weights that had been dragging me down for years. I drove home to my condo, a sleek high-rise with a doorman and a view of the park. It was a nice place, comfortable but not extravagant. I'd always been careful with money, perhaps because I'd watched so much of it disappear into the black hole of Jacob's lifestyle. As I unlocked my door, my phone rang again. Jacob. I silenced it and tossed it onto the counter. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I made myself a proper dinner, opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving, and enjoyed an evening free from worry about my brother's latest crisis. It felt strange. Good, but strange, like stretching a muscle I hadn't used in years. My phone continued to light up throughout the evening, Jacob's name flashing repeatedly on the screen. I ignored it. Around 11 p.m., my parents started calling too. Of course they would take his side. They always did. I turned off my phone completely and went to bed. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through my windows and a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. I made coffee, checked my emails, and only then did I power my phone back on. 27 missed calls. 43 text messages. 5 voicemails. I sighed and selected the first voicemail. "What the hell, man?" Jacob's voice was slurred, angry. "You left me stranded with a huge bill. They made me leave my Rolex as collateral. Call me back now." Delete. The second voicemail was from my mother. "Honey, Jacob said you left the party without paying. That's not like you. Is everything okay? Call me back." Not like me? I almost laughed. What wasn't like me was finally standing up for myself. Delete. The third was Jacob again, this time more desperate. "Dude, my card isn't working. Did something happen to our account? I tried to get gas and it was declined. Call me." Our account. As if we shared finances, as if he contributed a single penny. Delete. The fourth was my father, his voice gruff with disappointment. "Son, your mother's worried. Whatever is going on between you and your brother, you need to work it out. Family comes first, always. Family comes first." It was their mantra, the guilt trip they'd been using on me for decades. But where was that sentiment when Jacob mocked me publicly? When he treated me like his personal ATM? Delete. The final voicemail was Jacob again, now angry. "I just got a call from Lily's school. They said the tuition payment bounced. What the fuck, man? You're punishing my daughter now? Real mature." That one stung. I did care about Lily. She wasn't responsible for her father's failings. But I couldn't keep enabling Jacob under the guise of helping her. I took a deep breath and called Lily's school. "Hi, this is Michael Jensen, Lily Jensen's uncle. I've been covering her tuition, but there's been a change in the arrangement. If her mother, Kelly, would like to contact me directly about the payments, I'd be happy to discuss it with her." The administrator sounded confused but agreed to pass along the message. I hung up feeling a mixture of guilt and resolve. Lily wouldn't suffer, I'd make sure of that, but I wouldn't let Jacob use her as a pawn anymore. My phone rang almost immediately after I hung up. "Jacob." This time, I answered. "What the hell is wrong with you?" He spat without preamble. "Hello to you too, Jacob. Don't give me that crap. You canceled my card, you stopped Lily's tuition payments, are you having some kind of breakdown?" I laughed softly. "Actually, I think I'm finally seeing clearly for the first time in years." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm done," I said simply. "Done paying your bills, done covering your mistakes, done being your emergency fund." There was a moment of stunned silence before he exploded. "You can't do this to me. I have bills, I have responsibilities." "Yes, you do," I interrupted. "And it's time you handled them yourself. This is about last night, isn't it?" His voice turned wheedling. "Look, I'm sorry if I offended you. I was drinking, I was showing off for the guys. It's not about last night," I said. "It's about the last 15 years. It's about you taking and taking without ever giving back. It's about the complete lack of respect you've shown me while I've funded your entire lifestyle." "That's not fair," he protested. "I've had bad luck. Bad luck doesn't last 15 years, Jacob. Bad choices do." He was silent for a moment, then his voice hardened. "Fine. If that's how you want to be, fine. But leave Lily out of this. She hasn't done anything to you." "I agree," I said. "That's why I told the school to have Kelly contact me. If she wants to discuss Lily's tuition, I'm happy to talk to her directly." "You," he sputtered. "That's between us, not my wife." And there it was, the real issue. It wasn't about Lily, It was about control. Jacob didn't want Kelly to know where the money was coming from, didn't want her to know that his successful businessman persona was built on my dime. "Goodbye, Jacob," I said, and hung up. I blocked his number, finished my coffee, and went to work. The first few weeks were harder than I expected. Not financially, my bank account was actually growing without Jacob's constant withdrawals, but emotionally. Years of conditioning had taught me to feel responsible for my brother's well-being, and breaking that pattern left me feeling alternately guilty and liberated. My parents' disappointment was a constant weight. They called daily at first, then weekly, each conversation following the same script. "He's your brother," my mother would say, her voice thick with accusation. "Family helps family." "I have helped him," I would reply. "For 15 years, I've helped him. Now it's his turn to help himself." "You've always been cold," she would sigh. "Jacob feels things more deeply than you. He's sensitive." I'd bite back the bitter response that rose to my lips, that Jacob was only sensitive when it served him, that his supposed emotional depth never extended to considering how his actions affected others. Instead, I would simply end the call, each time feeling the fracture between us widen. About a month after I cut Jacob off, I received a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something, intuition, perhaps, made me pick up. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Michael? It's Kelly, Jacob's wife." I hadn't spoken directly to Kelly in years. Jacob had always carefully managed our interactions, keeping his wife and his financier separate. "Kelly," I said, surprised. "How are you?" "I've been better," she said, her voice tight. "Look, I'm calling about Lily's school. They said you told them to have me contact you?" I took a deep breath. "Yes. I've been paying Lily's tuition for years, but I can't continue to do it through Jacob anymore." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "What do you mean, you've been paying it?" she finally asked. "Jacob said his company covered it as a benefit." My stomach sank. Of course he had lied to her too. "Kelly, Jacob doesn't have a company. He's been bouncing between sales jobs for years. I've been covering Lily's tuition, his car payments, half your rent." Another silence, this one heavier. "That's not possible," she said, but her voice wavered. "We have an investment account." He shows me the statements. "I've been depositing $3,000 into his account every month for the past 5 years, I said quietly. "That might be what you're seeing." I heard a sharp intake of breath, then what sounded like a stifled sob. "I'm sorry," I said. "I thought you knew." "I didn't know anything," she whispered. "All these years. All his talk about his business deals, his investments. It was all you?" "Not all of it," I said, trying to be fair. "He does work sometimes. But yes, I've been supplementing significantly." "And now you've stopped?" "Yes." "Why?" It wasn't an accusation, just a simple question. I considered my answer carefully. Because it wasn't helping him. It was enabling him to avoid responsibility, to lie to you, to himself. And because I hesitated, then decided she deserved the full truth. Because he treats me like a bank account, not a brother. At Lily's birthday party, he humiliated me in front of his friends, then expected me to pay for the entire event. I realized nothing was ever going to change unless I stopped making it so easy for him to avoid consequences. Another long silence. "I see," she said finally. "What about Lily's school?" "I'm happy to continue paying her tuition," I said immediately. "But I'd like to do it directly. No more going through Jacob." I need to think about all this," Kelly said, her voice distant. "I'll call you back." She hung up before I could respond. 3 days later, she called again. "I left him," she said without preamble. "I took Lily and we're staying with my parents." I closed my eyes, a complex mix of emotions washing over me. Relief that she and Lily were away from Jacob's chaos. Guilt that my actions had contributed to their separation. Sadness for the family breaking apart. "Are you okay?" I asked. "No," she said honestly. "But I will be." After we talked, I did some digging. It wasn't just the money, Michael. He's been lying about everything. There were other women, gambling debts. It's a mess. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. "Don't be. I should have seen it sooner." She took a deep breath. "About Lily's school, I'll take care of it, I promised. You focus on getting back on your feet." "Thank you," she said softly. "You're a good uncle. A good man." After we hung up, I sat for a long time, staring out my window at the city below. I had expected to feel vindicated, triumphant even. Instead, I felt a profound sadness for what could have been, for the brother Jacob might have become if he'd been held accountable earlier, for the family we might have been. A week after Kelly left him, Jacob showed up at my door. It was almost midnight, and he was clearly drunk, swaying slightly as he leaned against my doorframe. "You happy now?" He slurred, his eyes bloodshot. "You ruined my life." I sighed, stepping aside to let him in rather than creating a scene in the hallway. "I didn't ruin your life, Jacob. I just stopped fixing it for you." He stumbled past me, collapsing onto my couch. My pristine white couch. I winced as I noticed the dirt from his shoes smearing across the fabric. "Kelly left me," he said, staring blankly at the wall. "She took Lily. She froze our accounts. Said I've been lying to her." He looked up at me accusingly. "You told her, didn't you? About the money?" "She called me about Lily's tuition," I said. "I didn't lie to her." He laughed bitterly. "Of course not. Saint Michael never lies. Just destroys families." I felt a surge of anger. "I didn't destroy your family, Jacob. Your lies did that. Your refusal to grow up and take responsibility did that." "What was I supposed to do?" He shouted, suddenly animated. "Tell her we were living off my brother's charity? Tell her I'm a failure?" "You could have gotten a real job," I suggested coldly. "Lived within your means. Been honest with your wife about your finances. Any of those would have been a start." He buried his face in his hands. "I can't believe this is happening. I lost everything in a week. Everything." Against my better judgment, I felt a flicker of sympathy. Then I remembered all the times he'd shown up like this before, desperate, apologetic, promising to change, only to return to his old patterns the moment the crisis passed. "What do you want, Jacob?" I asked tiredly. "If you're here for money, the answer is no." "I just need a loan," he said, looking up with red-rimmed eyes. "Just enough to get a new place, get back on my feet. Once I'm stable, I'll get Lily back, fix things with Kelly." "No," I said firmly. He stared at me as if I'd slapped him. "No? No," I repeated. "I'm not giving you any more money. Not a loan, not a gift, nothing." "Where am I supposed to go?" he demanded. "I'm sleeping on Mom and Dad's couch. I lost my apartment, my car." "That sounds like a problem you'll need to solve on your own," I said. "You could start by getting a job." "I have a job," he snapped. "A real job, Jacob. One that pays the bills." He stood up unsteadily, his face flushed with anger. "You think you're so much better than me, don't you? With your fancy job and your perfect life. You've always been jealous of me." I laughed incredulously. "Jealous? Of what? Your inability to hold down a job? Your failed marriage? Your mountain of debt? Of the fact that Mom and Dad love me more," he spat. "They always have. That's why you're doing this, you want to see me fall. You want them to finally be disappointed in me instead of you." His words hit harder than I wanted to admit. There was a kernel of truth there, buried beneath the manipulation and self-pity. A part of me had always wondered why our parents couldn't see Jacob for who he really was, why they continued to make excuses for him while holding me to a higher standard. "You should leave," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion churning inside me. "You're drunk, and we're not going to resolve anything tonight." "Fine," he muttered, heading for the door. "But don't think this is over. You can't just cut me off after all these years. It's not fair." As he reached for the doorknob, he turned back, his expression suddenly vulnerable. "I'm your brother, Michael. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" I met his gaze. "It used to mean everything. That's why I kept helping you, kept hoping you'd change. But a relationship has to go both ways, Jacob. You've taken, and never once considered what it cost me, not just financially, but emotionally. You've mocked me, belittled me, taken advantage of me, and through it all, I kept coming back because you're my brother. But I'm done now." He stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. "When you need family, when you're alone and have no one, you'll regret turning your back on me." He slammed the door behind him, leaving me standing in my living room, his words echoing in my ears. The following months were strangely peaceful. Without Jacob's constant crises to manage, I found myself with more time, more money, and significantly less stress. I took a vacation for the first time in years, a 2-week trip to Japan that I'd been putting off. I joined a rock climbing gym, made new friends, started dating again. Kelly kept me updated on Lily. They were living with her parents in the suburbs, and Lily had adjusted well to her new school. I paid her tuition directly and set up a college fund in her name, one that neither Jacob nor Kelly could access until she turned 18. My relationship with my parents deteriorated further. They saw my refusal to help Jacob as a betrayal of family values, and our conversations grew increasingly strained until we were speaking only on holidays and birthdays, brief, formal exchanges that bore little resemblance to meaningful communication. Jacob, after his initial fury, went silent. I heard about him occasionally through my parents or mutual acquaintances. He'd lost his sales job, was working part-time as a bartender, had moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. According to my mother, he was getting his life together, though I had my doubts. Part of me expected to miss him more than I did. He was my brother, after all, my only sibling. We'd grown up together, shared a childhood, a history. But the truth was, we'd never been close, not really. Our relationship had been defined by his needs and my resources, a transaction rather than a connection. 6 months after I cut him off, I received a text from an unknown number. "It's Jacob. New phone. Just wanted to say I get it now. I was an ass for years. You didn't deserve that. Not asking for money, just wanted to say I'm sorry." I stared at the message for a long time, unsure how to respond, or whether to respond at all. Was this genuine remorse or another manipulation? Had he really changed, or was this just a new tactic to get back into my good graces, and my wallet? In the end, I replied simply, "Thank you for saying that." He didn't text back, and I didn't reach out again. Some bridges, once burned, cannot easily be rebuilt. Some wounds run too deep for simple apologies to heal. But for the first time since our confrontation, I felt a small measure of closure. Whether his apology was sincere or not, I had stood my ground, had finally prioritized my own well-being over his demands. And in doing so, I had freed not only myself, but perhaps him as well, freed him from the comfortable dependency that had stunted his growth for so long. Almost a year to the day after I walked out of Lily's birthday party, I received an invitation to her 11th birthday. It was a simple card with a handwritten note from Kelly. "It would mean a lot to Lily if you could come. Small gathering, family only. Jacob won't be there." That last part gave me pause. Not because I was disappointed, I wasn't ready to face Jacob yet, but because it meant Kelly still considered me family, even after everything that had happened. The party was nothing like the previous year's extravaganza. Held in the backyard of Kelly's parents' house, it featured homemade decorations, a simple cake, and a handful of guests: Kelly's parents, a few of Lily's friends, and me. Lily threw her arms around me when I arrived, chattering excitedly about school, her new friends, the book series I'd introduced her to last year. She seemed happier, more settled, than I'd seen her in years. After the cake was cut and the presents opened, Kelly joined me where I sat watching Lily play with her friends. "She's doing well," I observed. Kelly nodded. "Better than I expected, honestly. Kids are resilient." She hesitated, then added, "She misses her dad, though." I glanced at her. "Has Jacob been seeing her?" "Supervised visits, twice a month," Kelly said. "It was rough at first. He was angry, volatile. But lately..." She trailed off, her expression thoughtful. "Lately, he's been different. More present. Less, Jacob-like." I raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" She shrugged. "He got a full-time job at that bar where he was working. Manager now. Has his own place, nothing fancy, but he keeps it clean for when Lily visits. He's trying." I processed this information slowly. It was hard to reconcile with the Jacob I knew, the eternal man-child, the perpetual victim, always looking for the easy way out. "That's good," I said finally. "I'm glad for Lily's sake." Kelly studied me. "He asks about you sometimes. Wonders how you're doing." I kept my expression neutral. "Does he?" "He says you were right. That he needed to hit rock bottom." She touched my arm lightly. "For what it's worth, I think cutting him off was the best thing anyone's ever done for him. It forced him to grow up." I didn't know how to respond to that. I hadn't cut Jacob off to help him. I'd done it to help myself, to break free from a toxic dynamic that had drained me for years. That it might have ultimately benefited him as well was an unexpected outcome. "I'm not ready to forgive him," I said honestly. "Not yet." "I understand that," Kelly said. "Just keep the door open a crack, maybe? For Lily's sake, if nothing else." I watched my niece, her face alight with joy as she showed her friends the science kit I'd bought her. She was the innocent in all this, the one person who deserved better than the chaos the adults in her life had created. "I'll think about it," I promised. 2 years passed. I settled into a life I hadn't realized was possible, one free from constant anxiety about Jacob's next disaster, from the perpetual drain on my finances and emotional energy. I was promoted at work, met a woman named Claire who shared my love of rock climbing and quiet evenings at home, adopted a dog from the local shelter. I maintained my relationship with Lily, taking her on monthly outings to museums, bookstores, science centers. Kelly and I developed a comfortable friendship based on our shared concern for Lily's well-being. My parents and I reached a fragile truce. We didn't discuss Jacob, and they gradually stopped trying to guilt me about my decision to cut him off. As for Jacob himself, I heard that he was still managing the bar, had started taking business classes at the community college, was consistently paying child support for the first time since his divorce. We didn't speak, didn't see each other, existed in separate orbits that occasionally intersected through our mutual connections. Until my father's heart attack. It wasn't severe, a warning rather than a catastrophe, but it landed him in the hospital for 3 days and sent our mother into a panic. I flew home immediately, taking time off work to help manage my father's care and support my mother. On the second day, as I sat in the hospital cafeteria nursing a cup of mediocre coffee, Jacob walked in. He stopped short when he saw me, uncertainty flashing across his face. He looked different, thinner, his previously styled hair now cut short, wearing simple jeans and a button-down rather than the designer clothes he'd once favored. "Michael," he said after a moment. "I didn't know you were here already." "Got in last night," I replied, my voice carefully neutral. "How's Mom holding up?" "Worried sick, but you know Mom, keeping busy to cope. She's badgering the nurses about Dad's diet." A small smile touched his lips. "Some things never change." I nodded, an uncomfortable silence stretching between us. "Look," Jacob said finally, shoving his hands in his pockets. "I know this isn't the time or place, but since we're both here, I owe you an apology. A real one, not a text message." I took a sip of my coffee, buying time. "I'm listening." He sat down across from me, his movements hesitant. "I was horrible to you. For years. I took advantage of your generosity, I disrespected you, I treated you like an ATM instead of my brother. And when you finally stood up for yourself, I blamed you instead of taking responsibility." He met my gaze directly. "I'm sorry, Michael. Truly." I studied him, looking for signs of the old Jacob, the manipulative charm, the hidden agenda. But all I saw was a man who looked tired, humble, genuinely contrite. "What changed?" I asked. He laughed softly. "Everything. You cutting me off was the worst thing that had ever happened to me. And the best." He ran a hand over his short hair. "I lost everything, Kelly, regular time with Lily, my apartment, my car, all the trappings of the life I thought I deserved but hadn't earned. I was sleeping on Mom and Dad's couch, 36 years old with nothing to show for my life." He shook his head. "It was rock bottom. And from there, I had two choices, keep blaming you and everyone else for my problems, or finally grow the hell up. And you chose the latter?" I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. "Eventually," he admitted. "Not right away. First, I went through a phase of hating you, then feeling sorry for myself, then trying to charm my way back into everyone's good graces." A rueful smile. "But none of it worked. Kelly still wanted the divorce. Mom and Dad were tired of my excuses. And you were completely absent for the first time in my life. There was no safety net anymore." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I started working at that bar just to pay for food. Minimum wage, long hours. But I discovered something, I was good at it. Good with people, good with managing the staff, good with the business side once I applied myself. The owner noticed, promoted me. Now I'm taking classes, working toward a business degree." "That's impressive," I said, meaning it. "I'm not telling you this to get your approval," he said quickly. "Or to ask for anything. I just want you to know that I understand now what you were trying to tell me all those years. About responsibility, about earning your way." He hesitated. "About respecting others." I didn't know what to say. The Jacob sitting across from me was so different from the brother who had mocked me at Lily's birthday party 2 years ago. Was it possible he had actually changed? Or was this just a more sophisticated version of his usual manipulation? "I appreciate the apology," I said finally. "But it's going to take time, Jacob. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight." He nodded. "I know. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, or for us to go back to how things were. I just wanted to thank you, actually. For doing what no one else had the courage to do, forcing me to face reality." Our conversation was interrupted by a text from our mother, asking us to come back upstairs. We walked together in silence, an uncertain truce established. Over the following months, Jacob and I cautiously rebuilt our relationship. It started with occasional text messages checking in on our father's recovery, then a monthly coffee meeting that became part of our routine. We didn't discuss the past much, it was still too raw, too fraught with pain, but focused instead on the present, his studies, my work, news about Lily. He never asked me for money, not once. In fact, he insisted on paying for our coffees, a small gesture but a meaningful one. When Lily's 12th birthday approached, he planned a modest celebration at a local park and paid for everything himself, though his salary as a bar manager was a fraction of what I earned. My parents noticed the change in him too. My father, after his health scare, seemed to look at both of us differently, with a new appreciation for the man I had become, and a clearer vision of who Jacob really was, stripped of the golden child mythology they had built around him. "You were right about your brother," my father told me during one of our now regular phone calls. "We didn't do him any favors by protecting him from consequences all those years. We didn't do you any favors either." It was as close to an apology as he would ever come, but I accepted it for what it was, an acknowledgement, finally, of the unbalanced dynamic that had shaped our family for decades. One evening, almost 3 years after I'd walked out of that birthday party, Jacob invited me to dinner at his apartment. It was a small place, nothing like the luxury condo he'd once rented on my dime, but it was neat, comfortable, proudly maintained. On his refrigerator, held by magnets, were Lily's artwork, his class schedule, and a photograph I hadn't seen in years, Jacob and me as children, arms slung around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. "I found that when I was moving," he explained, following my gaze. "Remember that camping trip? Before everything got so complicated between us?" I did remember. We'd been 10 and 7, fishing with our father at the lake, sleeping in a tent under the stars. Before academic expectations, before the golden child narrative took hold, before money and resentment and adult complications tainted our relationship. "I miss that sometimes," I admitted. "When things were simpler." Jacob nodded. "Me too." He hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I asked you here tonight because I have something to show you." He disappeared into his bedroom and returned with a manila envelope, which he placed on the table between us. "What's this?" I asked. "Open it," he replied, his expression a mixture of pride and nervousness. Inside was a bank statement and a handwritten letter. The statement showed a savings account with just over $15,000 in it. The name on the account, Michael Jensen. I looked up, confused. "I don't understand." Jacob sat down across from me. "It's the beginning of paying you back," he said quietly. "I've been putting aside 20% of every paycheck for the past 2 years. It's nowhere near what I owe you. I calculated that it's somewhere around $75,000, conservatively, but it's a start." I stared at the statement, stunned. "Jacob, don't say I don't have to," he interrupted. "I know I don't have to. I want to. I need to." He gestured to the letter. "Read it." I unfolded the letter with slightly trembling hands. "Michael, there's no way to adequately express how sorry I am for the years I took advantage of your generosity and kindness. I was selfish, entitled, and completely blind to the damage I was doing to our relationship. The money in this account is just the beginning of my attempt to make things right. Not just financially, but in every way. I know I can never fully repay the emotional toll my behavior took on you, but I hope this shows that I'm committed to trying. You were right to cut me off when you did. It was the wake-up call I desperately needed. While I wish I could have learned these lessons without hurting you so deeply, I'm grateful that you had the courage to do what was necessary, not just for yourself but ultimately for me too. I don't expect this to instantly repair our relationship. Trust takes time to rebuild, and I've given you every reason to doubt my sincerity in the past. All I ask is for the chance to prove, day by day, that I've changed, that I can be the brother you deserve. With love and profound gratitude, Jacob." I folded the letter carefully, unable to speak for a moment. The Jacob who had written these words bore no resemblance to the entitled, manipulative brother who had mocked me at Lily's birthday party 3 years ago. "I don't know what to say," I finally managed. Jacob smiled slightly. "You don't have to say anything. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did wrong, and I'm committed to making amends, for as long as it takes." I looked at the bank statement again, at the steady deposits made month after month, quietly and without fanfare. It wasn't about the money, it had never been about the money, not really. It was about respect, about acknowledgement, about valuing our relationship enough to put in the work to repair it. "Thank you," I said simply. "This means a lot." We ate dinner together that night, talking about ordinary things, work, family, the future. There was still a distance between us, a carefulness in how we interacted, but beneath it was something I hadn't felt in decades, the tentative foundation of a real brotherhood, one based on mutual respect rather than obligation. 5 years after I walked out of that fateful birthday party, I stood beside Jacob as his best man when he remarried. His bride, Elise, was nothing like the women he'd dated in his previous life. She was practical, kind, worked as a nurse at the local hospital. They'd met when he was taking business courses at the community college, where she was finishing her nursing degree. Lily, now 15, served as a junior bridesmaid, smiling broadly as she watched her father begin this new chapter. Kelly and her new husband attended as guests, testament to the civil co-parenting relationship they'd managed to build. Our parents, now in their 70s, beamed with pride, not the blind, preferential pride they'd once shown Jacob, but a more tempered, realistic appreciation for the man he had become through his own hard work and perseverance. As for me, Claire and I were engaged, planning our own wedding for the following spring. My life had expanded in ways I couldn't have imagined when I was trapped in the cycle of enabling Jacob's irresponsibility. I had more authentic relationships, more genuine connections, more joy in my daily existence. During the reception, Jacob and I stepped outside for a moment of quiet amid the celebration. Who would have thought we'd end up here? He mused, looking out at the garden where his wedding had just taken place. Certainly not me, I admitted. 5 years ago, I was pretty sure we'd never speak again. He nodded thoughtfully. I was angry at you for so long after you cut me off. I thought you were being cruel, heartless. He shook his head. It took me a while to see it for what it was, the kick in the pants I desperately needed. I didn't do it to help you, I confessed. I did it to save myself. I know, he said. That's what makes it even more meaningful, in a way. You weren't trying to teach me a lesson, you were establishing a boundary, one I'd given you every reason to set. He paused. But sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the actions people take to protect themselves, not the ones designed to change others. I considered this. I think we both learned something important. I learned that enabling isn't love, that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to let them face the consequences of their actions. And you learned that I'm responsible for my own life, he finished. That nobody, not you, not our parents, not even my wife, can save me from myself. That respect has to be earned, not demanded. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun begin to set over the garden. I still have the account, Jacob said after a while. The one I set up to pay you back. I'll have the whole amount by next year. I turned to face him. You don't have to do that, you know. I didn't keep track of every dollar I spent. He met my gaze steadily. It's not about the exact amount. It's about acknowledging what happened, taking responsibility for it. It's important to me. I nodded, understanding that this was part of his healing process just as cutting him off had been part of mine. Well, I said, when you finish paying me back, we'll have to find something meaningful to do with the money. Maybe a college fund for Lily's future siblings? Jacob's face lit up. Elise and I were thinking of starting a family soon, actually. Then it's settled, I said, clapping him on the shoulder. The next generation deserves a better start than we had. As we walked back into the reception, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The pain, the resentment, the years of enabling and being taken for granted, it had all been part of a necessary process. By walking away from Jacob's birthday party that night, I hadn't just freed myself from an unhealthy dynamic, I'd ultimately freed him as well. Love, I had learned, wasn't about endlessly giving without boundaries. Sometimes it meant stepping back, letting go, allowing natural consequences to unfold. Sometimes the greatest act of love was saying no to others and to the unhealthy patterns within yourself. Jacob and I would never have the uncomplicated relationship we'd had as children on that long-ago camping trip. Too much had happened, too many harsh words exchanged, too many years lost to resentment and pain. But what we were building now was in many ways stronger, more authentic, because it was based on who we truly were, not on the roles we had been assigned by our parents or the habits we had fallen into. As I watched my brother dancing with his new wife, his face alight with genuine happiness, I felt a deep sense of peace. We had both found our way, not back to what once was, but forward to something new, something better. And in the end, that was worth far more than all the money I had ever spent trying to fix him. The last handout I had given Jacob hadn't been financial at all. It had been the gift of accountability, the chance to become the man he was capable of being all along. And that, as it turned out, was the only thing he had ever truly needed from me.